Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program, where last episode we did our very last shuttle flight. And now we need to start making the Falcon 9. So, there's a few things that we need to talk about here that are not going to be exactly realistic with the Falcon 9. Now, let me just hop directly over to this diagram here. We are going to be skipping some of the earlier versions of the Falcon 9 and going directly for approximately a Block 5 Falcon 9. So we're going to be making a Dragon variant only. This variant will be, of course, it'll be able to be crewed, but we're going to mostly launch it uncrewed. So this is how we're going to end up doing this. As far as the recovery goes, that's going to be a little complicated for us. So I think that we're going to have the booster be recoverable insofar as it will it will recover, but we're going to not be able to do it at exactly the right time. I don't think we're going to be doing any return to launch site recoveries, and we're definitely not going to be landing in any drone ships. It will almost certainly always be a water splashdown. In Kerbal, that doesn't matter. In reality, of course, it does. But in Kerbal, it does not. So let's get going on designing this rocket. It's going to be interesting. We'll see how this ends up going. I'm kind of thinking that the grid fins are going to be aero brakes, which are going to be, or rather air brakes, which are going to be useful for us, of course. Now, as far as the Crew Dragon goes, the Crew Dragon seats 4, right? So we might go with like the Mark 1-3 command pod, which seats 3. That'll probably be what we end up doing. Now, this gets recovered via a parachute. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to put in, and it has like Super Draco thrusters for separation, which look a lot like this, actually. But this doesn't have any of those. This does have some monoprop, but it does not have any like launch escape system. We may or may not include one. Actually, we definitely could. We could include a launch escape system. And we probably will. So for now, I want to hop down into utility. We're going to go with a Mark 25 parachute. We don't have any color options on that. Okay, that's a little sad. But we're going to go with a Mark 25 parachute. And then I do want... Let's see, the Mark 25 is 2 chutes when we deploy it, correct? I believe it is. So I want to have 2 drogue chutes on here as well. So that'll be something like... Snapping on, please. Something like this. Now, the unpressurized trunk section ends up being decoupled, and this is what is recovered in terms of the actual spacecraft. So that's fine. We can put in a heat shield here, and this will be a 2.5 meter heat shield. Yes, that'll be a 2.5 meter heat shield. Then we'll need a decoupler here. So that'll be something like a TD25 decoupler. And then we'll need a cargo section here. So this will end up being probably not actually cargo. It'll end up being most likely a payload section. So we'll go with something like an SM-25 service module seems a little bit big. It does. So we'll probably end up going with just a service bay. Even that feels a little bit on the big side. Now, this should have some fins at the bottom here. Or, I mean, even that feels a little on the small side, I should say. This should maybe get stretched down like half again. So what that would end up looking like would be if we, and this isn't going to be correct in terms of the height, but if, or in terms of the width, but if we had something like this, it would be approximately correct. But we'll go with this as this is the parts we have available. Now, this should have some form of fins at the bottom. So that will end up being probably, well, let's look at our options. Do we want these to have steering capacity, or is this just for holding attitude? Because we could do like basic fins, and those would end up being, you know, something kind of like this. That's approximately right in terms of size. But if we want them to have some sort of steering capacity, then we would go with like Delta Deluxe winglets, which are definitely too big. What else do we have in terms of size that would be able to steer a little bit. There's these winglets here. That feels too big. I think we're going to try it with basic fins. If we need more attitude control, we can replace those with something else. But for now, that seems about right in terms of just like proportions. So we'll go with that for the moment. And then we need to build our second stage here. So the second stage is going to be a bit of a thing. But before we do that, I want to put in our launch escape system. We can't use a launch escape tower, but what we can do is utilize one of these like little separatrons. And in reality, they use 8 Super Draco thrusters. I'm wondering how that would go for us. We might end up just doing... Ooh. That did not actually attach. Let's try that again. There we go. If we did 8 of these, it would be something kind of like that. They feel a little on the big side, but I want to put this out on the pad for now. Let's separate these into their own launch escape stage here. Okay, let's put this out on the pad and see, and I should save this as the Falcon 9. Okay, let's put that out on the pad and see if it will lift. Just with those under Earth gravity. Now, it should be reasonably powerful, but not very lengthy. But in reality, we shouldn't ever actually use them, in theory. In theory, anyway. Let's see what we've got. Is this enough to even lift us? Thrust to weight is currently showing as 0.00, but I'm not sure that's true. It propels us a little bit. It's not super fast, but I mean, it does propel us up a little bit. So that's fine. We'll revert that back. Of course, that was the only thing we wanted to test there. And now we need to make the second stage. So this is 2.5 meter that we're doing this at. And that's all reasonably fine. But I do want to actually extend down our trunk section a little bit here, because I want to put some monoprop in here. This will end up being something about like that. That's about right in term. It's too long now. This is too long. Maybe we want to put the monoprop inside of the trunk section. So just mount that like right up over here. And we can bring something like 400 monoprop instead of 750. Oh, that fills up basically the whole thing. Nope, I hate that. Okay, what else do we want? We're gonna need some monoprop. We do have 30 here. We could just bring like 120 inside of the tank here. I don't like how much space this is using up though. We already have a lot less space than the shuttle, right? But our big parts are already brought up. We could put it up here, actually. So that would end up being the 120 size, like this. This is not really realistic in terms of the shape, and I don't like that. I wish that there was a 2.5 meter variant of the RCS fuel tank that was shorter. That would be really, really nice. Unfortunately, I don't think such a thing exists. We could take some, like, cylindrified monoprop tanks and have them strapped onto the outside. That is an option. They would be relatively large unless we were to go with smaller ones. How much monoprop do we really need is a question that we should ask here. Less than the shuttle did, that's for sure. I think the answer comes down to we probably need at least a 120. In which case, where do we want to put it? We could double up our service bays, but if we're going to do that, we might as well bring a 750, in my opinion. Okay, well, I do want to put some thruster blocks on here for sure. So we'll put on, like, one of these guys, I think, and we'll do about 4 of them. Do we want them to be down here, or do we want them to be on the actual shuttle pod? Probably on the actual shuttle pod, and I want them to be somewhere around here. Again, this isn't going to be perfectly accurate. We're not aiming for perfect accuracy here. Okay. So something along the lines of that. This RCS fuel tank is, in my opinion, a little too much, but we could just move these fins down and have the fins be down here like this, this throws off our proportions a little bit for sure. But that does leave us this full trunk section here. This is way too much monoprop. No doubt about that, but I'm not sure where else to put monoprop right now. If we come up with a better idea, we may remove this. Okay, now we're going to need to work on the second stage here. So I'm going to put in a TD25 decoupler, and we're going to put in a fairly large fuel tank here. This is going to be probably I'm looking at the size of this fuel tank here, and I'm thinking 2.5 meter doesn't feel quite right. It feels like we should be a bit smaller here than 2.5 meter. But this is correct as far as this command pod goes. No doubt about that. The command pod is the only reason we're at 2.5. So maybe we should end up going with like a Mark 1 command pod. Unfortunately for us, that is... I guess we could have it be white like this. It just doesn't feel correct the way that the Mark III does. So I think we're going to have to be at the 2.5 meter size just because of that. I don't love it, but here we are. I don't love this RCS fuel tank either. That is a compromise at the moment, and I'm not hugely happy about that. So this upper stage is, I think, going to have to be a little bit on the shorter side. So we make it be an X232. Then I'm going to make this be a Poodle engine, except we don't need 4 nozzles, obviously. So we're going to make this be, or is this a Corgi? No, this is not Corgi size, this is Poodle size. So we're going to make this be a Poodle, but we don't need 4 nozzles, this is just the single MVAC engine. So that's going to end up being this guy. And I want this to be a black shroud, if we can. I guess we'll have to do with a gray shroud. That might have to be what we do. Okay, so let's put in a TD25 decoupler here. That's our second stage. This would be preferable to be black. Our options are white, gray, white, or gray. So those are our options. We're going to go for gray here. And this decoupler is going to end up being metal, I guess. Again, I would prefer this to be black. We don't have the color options. If this was KSP2, this would go a lot better. No doubt about it. And having this be a 2.5 meter fairing will give us more space for our engine plate at the bottom with the 5 Merlin, or rather the 9 Merlin engines. So that is definitely a thing. So as we go down, we're going to need a larger fuel tank here. So this is going to be a 64. That gets us about halfway. So I'm going to put in a second 64. These are going to be purely white. This one, I think, having the black at the bottom is relatively okay. I really wish this was black, and I don't like this monoprop tank. And I'm not sure what our thrust to weight is going to be like here, but we're going to need an engine plate here. So that's going to be a 2.5 meter engine plate, so that'll be this guy. And then we're going to put in, of course, 9 engines here. So 8x1. There we go. So that's going to be absolutely fine. We'll have to decide what engine we want to use here. In terms of size, I mean, the Vector is going to be way too powerful and also probably a little too big. In terms of size, we may want to go with a, like, LVT-45. We can definitely make that be more compact, like this. And we don't have a 9th one in the center as of right now. If we can get in there. Yeah. Something like that is a theoretical possibility. Okay, I'm just wondering what options we have there. That's a boat tail white. This is a boat tail orange, but that's going to be way too big. I think we go with something like this. I would once again prefer these to be black, but whatever. We're going to need some landing gear here, and this isn't going to look exactly right either. Our options are basically just the LT2 landing struts. And this should be, I believe, 4 of them. And it'll be something kind of like this. And those will, of course, be starting retracted. To be clear, this is mostly going to be splashing down, so we're probably not going to have anything like that. Then, up here, we're going to need air brakes, is I think what we're going to use for the grid fins. So those are going to be attached somewhere about here. Now, we're going to need some form of control here. So we're going to need to toss in something along the lines of a... Let's see, we need a command and control here. This will be a remote guidance unit, almost certainly. These are all very small remote guidance units. Okay, I'm going to save this as it is here, and we're going to head back. Do we have the ability to get a larger remote guidance unit? Battery power will be a concern on the way back, but I think it's probably broadly okay. And then we'll do some test flights of this. But let's head into the R&D here. Let's see here. Specialized electrics. That's the rechargeable battery bank. We haven't needed that. Drone core, mech-jeb pod, communitron, relay antenna. Okay, the large remote guidance units are here. We can just grab that as is. Done. So we're going to hop back into the VAB now. And let's replace this small one with a larger one. I'm wondering how much battery power they can store. So we're going to ditch this guy. And we're going to put in the XL. Nope. We're going to put in the large. Okay. Battery power. That's only 30. So I'm a little bit concerned about power here. We should probably put in a battery bank here. This will end up being a 1K. Nope. 2.5K? Even that's too small. Okay. So we would need a 4K battery bank here, and this is not exactly available to us right now. Our science levels are probably too low to grab it. So I think we're going to need to have some small strap-on batteries, which is not necessarily ideal. But we can definitely put in about 4 of these. Like that. Just enough to bring this thing back down, ideally. Okay, now then. What else would we need for this? This is very close to functional completion, even though I'm pretty unhappy with the way that it actually looks. We'll make further refinements to that. I do think that we should probably move these landing struts to be in line with these black areas. Something like this. And that'll be reasonably fine. Now, what about power generation? Power generation will mostly be handled via alternators. Once we get up here, we're going to be limited to 150 electric charge. However, the Dragon capsule does have solar panels, doesn't it? Let's double check where those actually go. Let's see here. Dragon. Yes. It does have solar panels, definitely. And the solar panels end up being... Are they connected to the trunk section? I think that they are, if I recall correctly. So what that would end up meaning is we would have like a pair of solar panels, extendable, out over here. They'd be relatively small. Like, I think that these would probably be too big. I want this to be 2 symmetry. There you go. I think that these would be too big. But I also think that these would be too small. It's kind of a middle ground. Let's see. This is the 10C. I wonder what that looks like. Okay, that's those round panels. That's definitely not what we're looking for there. 3x2, 1x5. I think that's what we just had. Yeah. Okay. I want it to be about that size, but shorter. So I guess we'll just go with 3x2s. I'm not hugely happy about that. These are way too small. Never mind. I'm going to go with the 1x5s. And then I just want to clip these in a little bit. They're much more streamlined. So it'll be something kind of like that. It's a little much on the panel, but given our part restrictions, it'll do for now. Okay, I want this to be just black and white. Yeah, that'll be fine. I really wish this area here was black. We don't have the option for it. We just don't. Yeah. We just don't. If this was KSB2, we would. So this is not necessarily a perfect design. It's only 1.33 thrust. I'm not surprised that we have low thrust to weight on this, given what we've got going on here. We may need to end up shortening our first stage a little bit, but my goal here is that the first stage is enough to propel us up to a reasonable altitude, and then we can recover this and put this into orbit, like, in decent time frames. Let's see exactly how that's going to go. I expect there to be problems here at the beginning. This engine plate should not, like, ever be utilized. I want to have these be merged together. This is fine here. After we get to this point, the question is, how are we propelling? The answer is basically monoprop. Indeed. Monoprop is pretty much the answer at that point. Well, let's do a quick test flight and see how it goes. I don't expect this to necessarily go well. I think we're going to have some problems here. But let's see. So we're just going for an orbital test flight here. Staging looks good. We probably shouldn't have crew here. Crew! Right! How are we going to control this uncrewed once we detach this guy? That is a question that must be asked. And the answer is we need to fix that. So we need to extend our crew dragon a little bit here. Or I guess just our dragon. We're not really differentiating between a dragon and a crew dragon. So specifically what we need to do is we need to detach this, and we need to put a second remote guidance unit right there. And with that being the case, our monoprop thrusters can be moved down to a more efficient location right there. So I think that'll be absolutely fine. We're going to be maneuvering on monoprop once we detach our second stage. So that's fine. Our second stage is going to have lots and lots of fuel. So that seems relatively okay. In terms of shape, it's broadly fine. It's too thick, for sure. We should be a narrower rocket base, but I want to use the Mark 1-3 command pod for the number of Kerbals it can seat. In reality, it should be 4, but we are, of course, restricted. So let's put this out on the pad and give it a quick test flight. We'll see how it goes. I expect this to be slow off the pad. We may need to... It'll be okay. 1.33 is not ideal. We may need to upscale the middle engine a little bit in terms of its power level. That is a theoretical option. Now, I'm not going to use MechJeb here. We're just going to launch into a relatively equatorial orbit. So SAS on, throttle up, and let's lift this thing off. As expected, it's a little bit slow off the pad. Thrust to weight is going up quickly, though. Honestly, this doesn't seem too bad in terms of thrust to weight. So we're just going straight up for right now. It's relatively stable, which we would expect. Cool. So we're going to go up until we have an apoapsis of, I don't know, maybe around probably 20 kilometers. In reality, we should be pitching over a lot faster. I mean, we're going to be yawing over, but close enough. In reality, we should be starting our gravity turn much earlier than that, but I want to do a little bit of stress testing on bending, as well as how maneuverable this is. So we're going to do this pretty harshly. We've got about 50 seconds of burn time left here, and remember, we're trying to recover this, so that's going to need to retain some amount of fuel for a landing burn. Probably like 10 seconds of fuel, or maybe even more. Okay, so 20 kilometers, hard turning over to the horizon. I want to see how this works aerodynamically. Okay. It's pretty maneuverable. With the 9 engines gimbaling, I would expect that. We are having a bit of a hard time holding this attitude, but MechJeb can probably do it. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to keep about 15 seconds of fuel left here. We're pretty low, that is noted. This first stage is definitely underpowered. I'm just going to do this, and we're going to leave this for the time being and come back over here to surface velocity minus. Okay. I'm going to or rather open up our air brakes if I can catch it. Okay. And we're heading back over to this guy for right now. So we're quite low, right? We can see our time to apoapsis. Actually, we're going down right now. So it's very clear that at this juncture, we've got problems. Specifically, those problems is that our first stage is way too underpowered. That's fine. I want to do a little bit of recovery testing here. This claims to be 900 meters per second left here, 6.2 thrust to weight. That is huge thrust to weight. Okay, noted. I'm just doing a quick recovery test here. I want to see how this feels in terms of how much the aerobrakes slow us down. Obviously, we have problems with our stage's power level. There's no doubt about that. We need a little bit more thrust to weight in this stage. Or to just not head over quite that steeply. But I'm watching this recovery speed here right now. That is the main concern at this moment. So about 5 kilometers. 4 kilometers. I'm going to start up this burn at about 1 kilometer, and we'll see how that feels. 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's very powerful. No doubt about that. It's very, very powerful. So we can get these landings. That's for sure. Okay. Yep, that's a pretty clean landing, all things considered. And now the question is, how are we doing on our Falcon, our other vehicle? Where is that? I have no idea where it is right now. That's an Apollo 9 lander. It may have already hit the ground. I don't know. Let's head back to the tracking station and find out. Ooh, I should have just reverted it. Shouldn't I have? I should have. That could be a problem. I don't know where this thing is right now. Wait, where did it go? Did it just vanish on us? It may have. It shouldn't have hit the ground by now. The other should have hit the ground first, for sure. Okay, let's check in on our astronaut office. Are they MIA? They're apparently KIA. Okay, they will be back. Interesting. Well, I didn't intend to have them in there anyway, but that's fine. We don't actually care about that. They will be back. They'll respawn after a while. That's very, very interesting, for sure. So what I'm going to actually do is we're going to revert that back. That was a test flight. So I'm going to load our previous save, which would have been this one. We don't actually lose anything other than perhaps our payment from last mission. We'll double check that. And that was a test flight to determine shakedown. I didn't intend for crew to even be in it, but whatever. It's fine. We're going to revert that back, and we were always planning to revert it. Wait. That's here? That shouldn't be here. Hang on. Let's load a different save. You're 13, day 86, 14 minutes. It should be like this one then. This is later. Okay. There should be a save that is at the facility that we may or may not have lost our payment from the last mission. So let's load that up. We definitely need to continue to work on that first stage. The first stage needs a little bit more work, but that is something for another episode. So we're just reverting this back. That was always just a test flight. Let's check in on this here. Yeah, everybody's available for next mission. We have the correct amount of money. And hopping into the VAB, this won't be affected by our saves. So we'll have the Falcon 9 in here no matter what. So the first stage on the Falcon 9 needs a little bit more power. No doubt about that. And I think what I want to do to that end is I want to get the Falcon 9's second stage. Contains locked or invalid parts. Oh, right, because we need to re-grab the research. That makes sense. So I want to reduce the amount of fuel on the second stage, I think, and move that down to the first stage. And we can maybe make that, we can maybe use that to make it look better too, now that I think about it. So we want to grab large probes. Then we head into the VAB. And let's just make a small tweak here. So the tweak that I want to make is as follows. It's going to be a little bit less accurate in terms of where things are and sizing, but that's okay. It'll look a little bit better, in my opinion. So Falcon 9 will load this up, and this is so much cheaper than the shuttle, by the way. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to make this be black and white. I'm going to make the Poodle here have a white shroud. Then I'm going to drop this X232, and we're going to make this be an X216. That is going to go here. We're going to make that be white. This is going to go here. And then we're going to detach this guy. And then we're going to put in another X216 down here. So it's the same amount of mass and fuel. We're just changing where that fuel ends up being. Now, this is black and white right now. I would like this to be just black. Unfortunately, that's not an option. So we'll have to have it be black and white. I don't love that, but it would be something about like this. So we would end up having more fuel down in this stage. Our thrust to weight will remain the same though, and I feel like that needs to be addressed. So we could bump this T45 in the center up to being a 30, which would be slightly higher thrust at the cost of not being able to gimbal our center engine. I think that's acceptable, to be honest. So we'll just make this be a compact here. There we go. And now we've got the 30 in the center. That will fire at the same time as everything else, of course. And that will end up being 1.36. We can do the same thing with some of these others, but for the moment, I don't know. The extra fuel in this stage might do the trick. Maybe. But we are having a bit of a hard time lifting this with these engines. We could swap them out for a more powerful engine than the 45. That would end up being something like perhaps vectors. Vectors are, of course, extraordinarily expensive, but we can have thrust-limited vectors. That would be an interesting option here. So we would have these guys be here. This will need to be a compact variant. And we would need to move these inward a little bit. So we would need to grab... Oh, they're clipping together horribly. I don't like that option. What other options would we have here? Well, we could lift it with a fewer number of engines. That would be inaccurate, but we could do it. That is an option. We could use something like skiffs, which we would need this to be smaller variants, right? So like a 1.25 or even better, a compact variant like this. They're definitely clipping together, but if we look at this, 1.69, and we would have one additional skiff be in the center here, like that. So that would end up being 1.88. That's a lot more power, but they do definitely clip together. They're a lot cheaper than vectors, and we could thrust limit them down to be somewhere around like 70% thrust. That's a little too thrust limited. Somewhere around 80% thrust. And we'd want to do that probably with the center one as well. So I just hop in here, bring that down to about 80% thrust. That puts us at 1.5. It's definitely more powerful. It gives us about 2 minutes of burn. Okay, now if we take a look at this and we set this at Kerbal with high altitude, the question is, stage 4, how much delta V is that? 1,649. That should be sufficient. Okay, so absolutely fine there. The question is, how are we going to avoid these guys getting destroyed? Well, the answer to that is we're going to have this get us into some sort of an orbit and then deorbit it, is how that's going to end up having to work. So I'm thinking right now about cutting down the number of engines here just because these are all clipped together. So this would end up being something like 4x1. And it would be something more like this, right? Now, this is, of course, going to be 0.88. But it's an option, or we could have all of these be clipped together. It should be okay. We shouldn't have any issues from that, but it is somewhat concerning. And then these would, again, be thrust limited down to about 80%. Something about like that. We could keep the center one at 100. That's probably fine. Okay, so it is past time to put a cut in here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Next episode, we're going to do a second test flight of our Falcon 9. It's not going to be perfect, but we proved the recovery of this at least at relatively low speeds. What we need to do now is get this into orbit, detach this, or at least get it into a decent suborbit so that this will continue for a good long time, and then decelerate this guy and bring it down. It'll be interesting, for sure. We'll see how that goes. We'll have to develop a technique for doing this, given the limitations of Kerbal. You can leave your offerings to the engagement gods in the form of likes, comments, subscribes, and bell ringings, and a very special thank you to all of the channel members for making this video possible, including ALS Gamer, Shadow Wolf, Kentogan, Ali Lee, Upper Cumberland Gamers, Nick Smarty, Dimitri H, Punching the Microphone, Soccerman12UK, and all the rest. And of course, you. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click the join button down below the video, and as always, I will see you all next time.